Good day, folks. I'm David Scaer, longtime instructor here at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne. And we're getting to the end of the summer season. And the gospel for the 17th Sunday in Pentecost is taken from Luke 1 to 14. A few comments before we begin, and that is I'm a great proponent of a critical study of the Gospels. And there's we don't have one course in interpretation now at the seminary, at least when I was a student. You had a course in hermeneutics or interpretation. And here we have a case where a one-type uniform interpretation of the scriptures or the gospels is not possible, because the account that we have in Luke here simply would not fit into Matthew. But what is significant is that certain themes taken over, Luke takes over certain themes from Matthew, and he expounds them. And the Christological clue for this pericope, Luke 14, 1 to 4, is verse 11. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and who humbles himself will be exalted. And the type of parable we have here in Luke, which we will read now, is not found in Matthew. So it seems to be an exposition of what's found in Matthew, but which Luke himself is expanding. And this presents another issue too. This pericope has so many, it is not as well crafted together as something that would found in Matthew, because you have a number of themes brought in together. Now when it comes to preaching, the preacher certainly has the option, if he wants to, of choosing any one of these accounts. And of course, if he's engaged in expository preaching, then he could just go through the pericope. So I will begin reading from using the RSV. Luke chapter 14, verse 1. One Sabbath, when he went to dine in the house of a ruler who belonged to the Pharisees, they were watching him. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they were silent. And then he took him and healed him, and let him go. And he said to them, Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not reply to this. And you might want to take a look at the Greek on this. It doesn't say that they were not able to reply to him. It says they did not have the strength to reply to him. So that needs further exposition, because they're fully aware of what the answer to the question is, but if they had answered it, it would go against what they believed. Now he told them a parable. He told a parable to those who were invited, and when he marked how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, now that's a kind of a significant statement too. From this point of view, the good preacher is able to look at his environment, and then using the environment, using it for an opportunity to give an exposition. It says here, apparently Jesus, this is not a prepared sermon on his part. It says, he tells a parable, and there's no one definition for a parable. It's an allegory, an illustrative story that's made up right at the occasion, and that is how he marked how they chose the places of honor for them. And then he uses that to give an exposition of what happens. When you are invited by anyone to a marriage feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest a more eminent man than you be invited by him. And he who invited you, both will come and say to you, give place to this man, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when the host comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your kinsmen or your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you and you are repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor man, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, and you will be repaid at the resurrection. I think you have here a couple of sermons, and so we'll just take these things out one by one and see how this comes out. I have become a fan of a writer in New Testament, not New Testament, but in New Hampshire. If I seem a little woozy, I just had 2 teeth replaced, and the anesthetic is still wearing out. The name is Fritz Weatherby, and he has 1-page episodes in 10 books, which are very delightful reading. And he tells this story back in New England in New Hampshire of the Puritan police. And they went around, and people who were breaking the Sabbath by working or having fun, they would be reported and they'd have to pay a fine. And Fitz Weatherby, who has it's a dry sense of humor, he makes the point, well, if you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, then how do the morality police justify that they're working on the Sabbath? I thought that was very, very, very clever insight, and he tells us with a great sense of humor. And that is that I think there are a lot of people who fit into this category who like to in the Sermon on the Mount, it has to do, can you take the speck out of your neighbor's eye? And then there's something even more significant here, and that is if your son or your ox has fallen into a well, and here we want to check the Greek to see, oh yes, I wonder if the idea here is that the son has also fallen into the well, or an ox. Will you not immediately pull him out? And this type of no doubt about it, if your son has done this, has fallen into the well, now it's the question. Apparently an ox has a great deal of wealth in agrarian society. After all, they were the tractors of the day. And you're going to pull him out on the Sabbath day. So what this means, and it's kind of profound here, is that all law is not equal. That there are times when certain regulations have to be broken. Because the regulation is, you can have a great sermon here on the function of the law. On the function of the law. And that mercy takes precedence over following regulations. And not just regulations, there are certain things in society that keeps it together. These are the basic rules that you open the door for other people. You let other people pass. There are all kinds of rules on the road. There might be a time also that if a man is driving his wife to the hospital because she's about to deliver her child, well, maybe you'll have to go through a red light. This is a topic I think that can be discussed with the people in a sermon. Now the next one has to do, Jesus was invited to a dinner. It's kind of amazing. Apparently this was not as pastors we get invited to a number of situations, and we might be hesitant to go because maybe they're not in the same doctrinal fellowship as we are. Apparently this was not an issue for Jesus. He was invited to a dinner, and he notices that the people are going to take the seats of honor. Now, it's been some time since I've been a pastor at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Gillespie, Illinois. And we had a wedding, and it was not a very prominent church. We had a wedding in the hall, and even though everybody had left, the mother of the bride insisted in staying at the table in the most prominent seat as long as she could. And where you sit at a dinner really counts a lot. I mean, you go to a dinner with a number of people. You want to sit with your own kind. Oh, you want the best seat. I had another occasion when I was asked to preach at the 25th anniversary of the ordination of a pastor. And I thought, well, when it came time to the dinner, and it was a tent outside, when it came time to have the dinner outside the church, I figured, well, I'm the speaker, I'm the preacher, maybe I should sit up in front at the head table. Well, I sat down, and about 5 minutes later, I got very wheezy about the whole thing, and I got up. And this is a magnificent parable of life that really is true in all kinds of situations. To avoid embarrassment, let the other person go first. About 30 years ago, I preached in Hong Kong, and it was still under British control. And if I remember rightly, I preached on this pericope from the Gospel. I do not remember what I said. It probably wasn't astounding at all. But after it was over, the wife of the man who was in charge of protocol at the American embassy came up to me, and she was all full of anxiety. And she said, well, I must have said something that got through to her. Because when the American consul entertains other members of the diplomatic corps, there's always a question of who sits where and who comes in first. This is not an incidental thing. It's true in graduations that certain faculty persons have their various places in the procession. It's true in the church when you have a number of pastors coming together for an installation or an ordination, that there is an order where the most prominent people sit. And Jesus seems to say, don't take any chances. When you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place so that when your host comes, I'll take a look at the word for host. Then you will be honored. I don't think that it says host in there. Oh yes, so that when the one who was in charge comes, sit and take the highest seat. Now you can wax eloquently on the value of humility. And the word for host I see is keklekos, which seems to be the one who's in charge of arranging the thing. And I think you can wax eloquently, a little etiquette. I think it's good, a little etiquette in a sermon. And maybe Americans are a little bit weak on etiquette. But that's not really this is not really the account. This is not really the theme of this particular pericope. The theme of the pericope is in verse 11, And here the language is found in St. Paul. It is certainly verse 11, whosoever exalts himself shall be humiliated, and whosoever humiliates himself shall be exalted. This is what is intended in the Creed, where it says he was incarnate by the Holy Ghost of the Virgin Mary and was made man. That's the meaning of the phrase, and was made man. He humiliated himself. This sounds very much like St. Paul in Philippians chapter 2, and that's not the pericope, but it certainly seems to be very similar here, where he says they should all be of the same mind. Regard yourself in humility over against someone else. Let each one not look to the things of himself. Consider Jesus Christ, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not think his being equal with God was something that he had stolen. But he humiliated himself, taking on the form of a servant, and in the form of a human being, he was found as a man. And here comes that word for humiliation. He humbled himself. He humbled himself to the point he was obedient to death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God has highly exalted him. It seems as if Paul might have known this particular parable that Luke records here. So it's Christological. And it also speaks to how Christians understand ethics, and that ethics is more than an articulation and an application of the law, but it is really the projection of the life and the person of Jesus into the Christian church. And each Christian in himself is a little Christ in himself, in that he is working for the benefit of other people. So you consider other people more the reason that you take the lower seat, the less significant place, because you think you regard the other person as more important. And this is exactly what Jesus did. He regarded us and everybody else more important than himself. Now I am doing this webcast a few days after Pentecost, not Pentecost, but after the Ascension. And this certainly fits into the Ascension, because Jesus, who humiliated himself, was put in the most humiliating of circumstances by his death, by crucifixion, where they insult you and beat you up, and when they crucify you, they leave you almost naked so people can make fun of you. Because he endured that, God has highly exalted himself. He who humbles himself will be exalted. So at first glance, this pericope does not seem to have a great deal of doctrinal, what we Lutherans would consider doctrinal content. But if you go and you look behind these particular stories, you will see that this is a story about Jesus himself and how Christians act. Now, as I began by saying, every gospel has to be appreciated by itself. There is not one rule or pattern of hermeneutics or preaching. And so Luke, this is great. This is really based. This is really based on the Sermon on the Mount, the impoverishment of the human spirit. Yet this parable, well, all of those things can be developed into a sermon, but it can even go further, because now some of us are in congregations where the congregation basically consists of family relationships. Now, I had two congregations, and they were all related. They were all related to one another. And I learned that at the first congregation. So when I went to the second congregation, I was prepared for this situation, in the sense that I found out before I got there who these people were. And that's a very tough nut to crack. Nut to crack. It's very difficult to get through that, because people like to be with their own kind. Birds of a feather flock together, and you want to be with your own friends. You go to a party, you sit down with your own friends. Here Jesus gives an entirely different ethic. This must have been an absolutely lavish occasion. I've been to lavish occasions, not too many in the last 10 or 20 years that I can remember. But it's really wonderful to be at one of these occasions where the servers of the dinner look better than the people who are being served. And here Jesus says, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. Because if you do that, you will feel obligated to invite them. So even though a person has done a great favor for you, that anyone who's done a great favor for you, it's payback time, and you will want to do it. And I don't know if August is the time of the year to speak about Christmas, but Christmas presents is not necessarily a giving of anything that we own or that we have. It's not pure giving. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not pure giving, because we expect to receive something in return. And those people who are in the professions, doctors and dentists, attorneys, they receive some very lavish gifts. And many of the gifts which we receive are in some way buying our loyalty so that we will do business with them. And Jesus says, no, don't do that. Invite people who find it impossible to return the favor, because with God there is no returning the favor. Here we got the entire Lutheran doctrine of grace, that there is nothing that we can do in return. And I'm always a little uncomfortable. It says here, and you will be, if you invite people who cannot return the favor, Jesus says in verse 14, you will be blessed. And that's the word makarios, the word which is taken over from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit. You will be blessed because they cannot repay you. And then it doesn't say that there'll be no reward for what the Christian does. There will be a reward. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. I just love the way this whole thing holds together. Because at the day of judgment, what will be given, the Christian will receive a recompense for what he has done. The judgment is based upon the good works that the Christians do for other people, not moral perfection, but how they assist others. I'm looking here at the epistle for the same Sunday, and it seems that's from Hebrews. And with this, in all kinds of sermons, I always like to, and this is my own, the way I proceed, I like to look at the appointed lessons. And Hebrews has some amazing material that correspond very well to the gospel. Hebrews 13, 1-7. This is about brotherly love. Show hospitality to strangers. And there's a reason for that. Now, this is the ancient world. There are no hotels. And so people wander on the roads, and frequently, they have absolutely nothing, no place to get food, nothing to sleep. So the idea of show hospitality to strangers. Then the next verse, 3. Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, those who are ill-treated, since you are in the body. Another amazing statement, because, there's a kind of a reluctance. We don't really have, of course, what seems to be a reference here is maybe, there seems to be a reference to maybe that this epistle was written in Rome and that Paul and Peter are already in prison. Paul speaks about his own imprisonment. Peter probably is in prison by this time now. Maybe that's the underlying theme there. It's utterly amazing how reluctant people are to go visit other people who are hurting. I mean hurting in the sense of having lost their job, hurting in the sense of coming down with a bad diagnosis, hurting in the sense that they have lost a spouse or another family member. And it also says in this thing, by the way, keep your life free for the love of money. That's the way the world operates. It operates in this way, and it's also in the gospel. It operates in this way that whatever I do, I will do only those things for which there will be a reward. And then maybe it says in verse 7, the liturgical calendar puts an emphasis on saints' days, which is absolutely fine. It says, remember your leaders, that's Hebrews 13:7, your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God, and consider the outcome of their life and imitate their faith. Just a personal recollection, my father has been dead nearly 50 years. And the congregation in Brooklyn is now Trinity Lutheran Church of Flatbush, where I grew up, is now an ELCA church. I have been back maybe 3 times since my mother left there. And they still, which is very strange, they still remember my father. And they have a Sunday in the fall called Pastor Scaer Sunday, because the memory among the people is how he served them. And they have, in the newspaper here in Fort Wayne, they have Clergy Appreciation Sunday. It sounds a little tacky. Remember your clergy person. Of course, the name of the game is to buy some newspaper space and put the pastor's picture in there. But it is through the pastor that the kingdom of God is spread. I'm just looking at Proverbs here. It says in Proverbs 25, verse 6, that's the Old Testament reading, do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great. It almost as if the parables of Jesus are based on that particular is based on that particular thought, and that it is much better to go through life, both from a spiritual point of view and from a viewpoint of personal success, of putting the other person forward. Now, when it comes to, I always found Luke, I like Matthew, and I like Matthew. Luke, for me, is more of a challenge, big time. But what I find to be a very valuable way of approaching this kind of pericope, where you have several themes competing with one another, is to read this material, look at the Greek, and see what words are significant. And I think the words for everyone who exalts himself, that in the Greek I think is very valuable. And just sit down and write a sermon and prepare a sermon that in a way very well follows the example of how Luke put the material of Jesus together. I'm sure there's a logic there, but I'm not so sure that I get the logic. Thank you very much.